Marvel's Midnight Suns is a tactical strategy game combined with an RPG, and man alive, it is a weird mixture. I'm a fan of XCOM, and it builds that inside of a Marvel world, a franchise I also don't really mind. It also gives us some interesting character customization impacts. Not just cosmetic ones, and we'll talk about the issues involved with this game and some of that stuff a little later in the video too, but also impactful in-game ones for extra damage, character abilities, cards, and again, that sweet, sweet Marvel backdrop. That inside of this video I won't spoil, by the way, all of the footage will be from the first couple of hours, so at least relatively minor spoilers. As hearts appear above my dog's face, I'm also kind of reminded of the almost Sims-esque elements here too. Here I am completing a hangout with one of my mates for some extra friendship and some cosmetic items. This is the weird and wonderful world of Marvel's Midnight Suns. Let's jump into the madness, and subscribe if you wouldn't mind. Midnight Suns comes out of Firaxis, the developers of Xcom. And as you can see, it's also building a pretty interesting Marvel world and an RPG world around it. Here's the character creator, which is somewhat limited in options, but as you move through the game, you'll unlock all sorts of cosmetics. They are also a point of contention, just like this hairdo, but we'll talk more about those slightly later in the video. Now, the world that it places us in is, at its core, still a tactical strategy game. And so the fundamental missions inside of the game follow that tactical gameplay, but use our character, Hunter. We're setting out basically to destroy our mum and save the world, and we're doing it with a whole load of Marvel heroes at our back. Now, as you can see, the game does a fairly good job, this is the tutorial or introductory combat mission, at teaching you the ropes. The actual missions themselves that we're playing here, with Doctor Strange smashing down his heroic ability, are the fundamental strategic element to the game, right? And much like a game like XCOM, of course this leans heavily on it thanks to Firaxis' experience with developing it, you can play cards instead. So instead of, say, an XCOM soldier looking at someone and trying to shoot them with a 68% chance, here we play cards based around all of these people, the Marvel heroes, and their abilities and unique things that they bring to the battlefield. We'll talk a little bit more about that later though, because the other element that's taking place here is the story. It's also an RPG game at its core, and a Marvel one at that. And so the story that it builds and the characters that it develops outside are brought back here, inside of the missions. Here we have Captain Marvel considering kicking a couch at a bunch of goons. They'll take one hit and be destroyed, but more advanced enemies, here's the main bad gal Lilith, our mum, actually. It's a complicated story that the game will absolutely tell, do take a little bit more of a beating. So what we're seeing here is the mission table. And if you've played XCOM, you'll be familiar with this. This is where we set up. We take the story elements, the heroes, the people, and the gear that we've unlocked, and bring it together, right? Select your squad, select their gear and equipment that you want to bring, and then you go into this tactical gameplay. So far, it probably doesn't seem all that weird. And in case you haven't gathered, this is a weird good, generally speaking, although there are some issues absolutely that we need to talk about later in the video, not necessarily a weird bad. But it's important to note that this game is trying to do a lot. It takes XCOM, it lifts it up to the next level by providing more story. Of course, a more rich and developed universe is being added here as well. We haven't even talked too much about the Marvel element and that cinematic universe. And then finally, it's all coming together in what arguably can, as I mentioned in the introduction, feel a little bit almost Sims-esque. Because outside of those tactical missions, we're building relationships with the heroes. Not just engaging in dialogue with them, but also activities. Here we are in very GTA 4 style, me and Nico Bellic going bowling or something. Here we are watching a movie together and embracing it. There'll be dialogue options often throughout, and as you can see, we get some cosmetics and we level up our friendship. This will have an impact in the game as well, a real impact on the battlefield. So it's kind of feeding into itself. And in credit to Firaxis and the team behind it, they do actually a fairly good job at merging the the working out and the man, it's dark out tonight, friendship level gained conversations with some of the more tactical gameplay elements as well. It's as you move through and start to get into the detail that it reveals more of its weirdness, both the good and the bad. It has a unique approach to difficulty scaling that I quite like. Different levels of 8 unlock depending kind of on how well you do and how well you're ranked in your missions. It's a nice approach that should, in theory, keep it just right. One disappointment as an XCOM player and big fan, and as I quite like Marvel kind of guy, was that you couldn't fail in such a hardcore way like you could in XCOM. You can't actually fail a campaign, at least not yet. What I really like, though, is this. These scenes are fantastic. The way that the heroes play out, and the actual combat system itself is incredibly satisfying to use. There are some differences from other games, of course, particularly like the XCOMs and the ones that we might lean into more commonly, but in a nutshell, the card-based system works really well. It provides more impact to this kind of thing as well, the sparring, the friendships, the different bonuses, trying to provide some progression to all of the different characters in the game. You'll also build up those relationships with them as well, that kind of Sims-like mechanic, and they'll exist in the world. Here we can see Doctor Strange being naturally a bit weird and strange, and helping us unlock this kind of loot crate, attack essence, heroic essence, skill essence mechanic. What you need to know is that this is basically the research function that will allow us to unlock different abilities or that kind of thing. There's also a very Skyrim Fusroda weirdness to the game, as you've just witnessed. Another interesting element. And then finally, we have the more open world RPG thing that Marvel's Midnight Suns is bringing. Here you can see I'm exploring an area called the Abbey. The Abbey, while somewhat optional, although required at the start, there's no way around this sequence, for example, and the wider grounds associated with it, as you can see on the map, provide us a place to explore for rewards. There are certain items that are available, and ultimately we can get these sort of in-game loot crates, providing cosmetic items that, as I understand it, you can either pay for, and my goodness, one of the issues is the price here. It's a $60 AAA title with a nearly $60 season pass slapped on top, and if you don't want that, you can purchase some cosmetics separately. Now, I'll let you decide what you think of that, but for me, at least, it felt a little overpriced. And if I could go back in time, I mightn't stretch to the legendary version. I feel like the base version might be a better deal. That's not, again, to say that this is a bad game, and I don't want that to be the takeaway from this video, because I don't believe it is. Here I am unlocking a better card for my deck, again, inside of that living world that it's building, interacting with the real characters, and having a real effect on the cards and ultimately the missions and the gameplay that I'll be hopefully winning. Although again, like I say, there's no necessarily hardcore way to lose. Some of the downsides to this open world part, particularly if, like me and like many regular viewers of my channel, if you're approaching this from a strategy gamer perspective, you may find some of this a little bit tedious. Now, you don't have to stop for every chicken mushroom like I am there, but there are some elements outside of this tactical deck building combat system that you will have to engage with. Yes, absolutely, the cutscenes are skippable, and you might want to skip them if you don't like one-liners and G-rated commentary, because it provides a lot of that, it does. But, generally speaking, it's not too bad. Likewise, performance, I play on PC, has not been too bad. A little bit of stuttering, some frame drops where combat gets particularly intense, but I haven't suffered major issues and it wouldn't put me off personally playing the game. But do check your system requirements, because some people, not just some but quite a few, have reported some problems on PC. I can't speak to the performance on console. But speaking of those two different worlds, it brings me to the ultimate point here. What makes this game weird, and then I'll conclude my final thoughts. I think that the difficulty that Marvel Midnight Suns may run into is that it stretches across many genres, and actually, to its credit, does a pretty good job at pulling them off. Now, it's a tactical strategy game here as we fight on the battleground. There is sort of a turn-based system, of course, and it's card-based. It's deck building. It's upgrading our heroes outside of the battle and outside of missions using research and gear, and then bringing them in to try and take down wave-based enemies or complete objectives. And it does a great job at that. But the other stuff will get in the way if you're looking for an XCOM experience. Even though you can skip the cutscenes and you don't have to necessarily run around the world, simply having to move your character from this table and then run through a few corridors and down the hall to another room and then run back again will become tiresome if you're comparing it to a core, flat-out, focused tactical strategy experience. And I suspect it's true the other way around. Used to playing Marvel games based around their story, maybe action RPGs, then you may find the turn-based or sort of slower strategic element of planning out your moves and looking at the cards to be a little bit slow. And in that respect, it's where Marvel Midnight Suns' weirdness plays through. So, Marvel's Midnight Suns is therefore trying to juggle lots of different balls at once, and occasionally it does drop one or two, but generally speaking, it builds what I'm assuming would have to be one of the best Marvel games at this point. I mean, they've been scarred a few times in the past, but also it builds an impressive tactics game. It takes a deck building approach, so changes it a little bit, but it's enjoyable enough, and even if you're not a Marvel fan, I think you will enjoy it. Do you need to rush out and buy the game though? Unless it ticks all of the boxes for you, my answer would generally be probably not. Wait for a sale, wait for a couple of performance patches, and you should be left with a pretty enjoyable experience. Thanks so much for watching the oddity that is Marvel's Midnight Suns, and I'll see you in the next one.